Okay. All right. Okay, I'll just go quiet for a second, then I'll jump in with my cheesy introduction and we can go from there. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Rock and Roll Farming Podcast. And today I'm heading north to beautiful and historic York to talk to Collaborative Projects Director at Fera Science, Adam Bedford. Adam, how are you?
I'm fine, Will. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I think that is a very cool job title you have, Adam. If someone told me they were a collaborative projects director, I'd think, oh, that's an interesting role. I'd want to
It's a
know
bit
more.
it's a bit of a mouthful. Do you want me to tell you a bit more about it? Are we getting straight into this?
You can tell me a bit about it now, and then we'll go more about it later.
Okay, basically, I'm bringing projects together between farmers and scientists to solve problems. So that's what collaborative projects are. So it is exciting.
Much needed, I would say that because often research and farms, there's some, Britain's we've got some brilliant research and facilities and universities, world renowned, and science, and often there's a bit of a disconnect between that and the actual farms, isn't there?
I think you're absolutely right, and that's what we're trying to do in these projects that we do to make sure that there's as much, if not more, value sometimes in the knowledge that the farmers and growers and landowners bring to projects. And I think, just as you've said, I think too often in the past there's been a research project where the farmers might be brought in at the beginning and then
Mm.
told about the results at the end. And what we're doing with ours is making sure that whatever the problem happens to be, and we can talk about this in due course, that the people on the ground facing the problem who are seeking a solution to grow a better crop or solve an environmental problem, that they're in the research from the beginning. So when we're bringing our scientists from Fera together with them, the scientists are bringing their knowledge and expertise and scientific endeavour to bear in the project, but they're also learning directly from the farmers about what's going to work on the ground.
Mm.
And then I'm in the middle, knowing a bit about both worlds to try and steer it as best I can. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, I'll bet it is, and I bet I bet farmers really enjoy that, don't they? Like I'd love that. I'd find that really interesting, just
They,
from
they,
a
they do. We had a group of farmers actually. They were a national group. They came from NFU, but one of them who came to Ferris said, I've visited other places before sometimes, and I've gone away sort of with my head blown because I've seen all of this amazing stuff, and then I get back to my farm and think, I don't, I'm not quite sure now what to do.
yeah.
Um, and that's a risk sometimes in science because doing all this high end stuff that's not always that practical.
Mm.
But he said, but I've been here and I understand that this is an applied science organisation, and I've come away with some ideas that I can start to have a go at.
Mm.
And that for me is that's golden, isn't it? Because why would we do this stuff if it's not going to make an impact?
Yeah.
So that's what we're all about. So those are projects that I'm working on.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll come back to Farah in a bit, but tell me about your roots. You obviously have a Yorkshire accent. Listeners will be able to hear that. A deep connection to Yorkshire. You're from a farming family.
I'm not from a farming family, so I live in just outside York. So we're just in East Yorkshire. So just to um, give people a bit of a geography lesson, or if you like, work out where they're hearing me from. We're just between York and Pocklington, so we're in East Yorkshire. So we're at the bottom of the Yorkshire Wolds. So that lovely rolling countryside that not many people visit because they all go to the Yorkshire Dales.
Yeah.
So that's where we are, just near York. But I'm originally from Huddersfield in West Yorkshire, not from a farming family. Grew up on a very normal housing estate, and then fell into being interested and excited about farming.
Did you have any previous generations in farming? Have you ever done
Um,
any research into that?
no, not really previous generations, other than most people had a farmer somewhere, if you
Yeah.
like, but
Yeah.
nothing directly. But I did have an uncle who I didn't know very well, my mum's brother, who died when I was at agricultural college. But I didn't know him very well. Just sometimes you don't know family members very well. But I spent a bit of time with him because he was a farmer. He had been a farmer and then ended up working for somebody else. He was a shepherd on the hill farm.
Okay.
And I remember being a child and spending some time with him. And this is going to sound a bit sort of in the distant past and
Yep.
thinking about these stories that have an effect on you. But I think they do have an effect on you. I remember probably being about 12 or 13, and the part of West Yorkshire that they were in, it's not exactly here, but people will know this if they're not from Yorkshire. If you drive across the M62 between Yorkshire and Lancashire, you go past the farm in the middle of the road,
Yeah.
which is the famous one. So not exactly there, but very close to there, the next valley over. So that's the kind of landscape that it was in. And he worked on this farm as a shepherd. And I rang him one day and said, look, I'm interested in farming. Could I come to the farm for a day? So he said, you come on this day because we're gathering the sheep for lambing. So we did this massive walk all across that moorland landscape. And I remember we sat down under a kind of like a bit of a dip, a little almost like a culvert under the road, just for a bit of shelter. And all the sheep were all over the road because the sheep can just go over the road on this area, not far from the M62. And I remember like cars beeping their horns, and then it started to snow. And I remember him just going, oh, well, we'll just sit here and have a bit of dinner, shall we? And have a cup of tea. We'll have a rest before we go back. And don't worry about those cars beeping their horns. These sheep had been here before they were. And I just remember sitting there thinking, God, this is a life, isn't it? And I've always remembered it. It might be, it could be nearly 30 years ago now. So I sort of had this, if you like, slight family connection to it, but then thought, I like this. I'd like to start to work on farms a bit, and then I did.
So that was where how you ended up at agricultural college studying.
Yeah, so So I had that slight family connection. I did all sorts of when I was at school, sort of farming related type jobs. I did a milk round for years when I was at school, and then used to do that so the farmer could stay at home when I learned to drive. So I delivered milk for years, and then he had a farm also in Huddersfield. Oh God, I've just remembered something which will be slightly embarrassing, but I'll tell you this one: how I ended up on his farm. Actually, Are we allowed to say got the piss taken out of me? We're allowed to say that on the podcast.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, fine. You're not going to edit that out. God, I've literally just remembered this. When I was at school, did you ever do the Duke of Edinburgh Award?
I didn't. My wife did though.
Duke of Edinburgh? I only did the bronze one. I bet she got gold, didn't she?
Oh, of course she did. Yeah,
of course she did. Of course she did.
Absolute nerd. Yeah.
Yeah. I only did the bronze, but I did the bronze thing, and it was something like in the Duke of Edinburgh Award. I think they just called it skill. You had to do a skill, and one of the skills, and like I'm cringing now because I like absolutely got caned for this amongst like urban lads at school when I was about 14. One of the skills was sheep. That was the thing, right? So they're like, okay, we're going on the class. What skill do you want to do? Want to do sheep?
Yeah.
But the guy I worked for on the milk round was a beef and sheep farmer. So I said, look, I've got to do, I'm doing the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and in order to do this part of it, I need to go and work on a farm. Could I come and do it? So he said, yeah, of course you can. So we used to deliver milk on a Saturday morning, and then go and do some farm work on the afternoon. And it was really simple stuff, count 50 sheep through a gateway, just all working on farms. So I did that, and then realized that I wanted to get more experience and work on different farms. Was absolutely useless and disinterested in tractor work.
Yeah.
Just disaster zone. So that's not going to work. So I didn't want to do anything like that. But I went to learn how to shear sheep. Because I thought if I can learn if I can shear, I can earn a bit of money and I can get around some farms. So that's what I did, and then went to agriculture college after that.
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned a milk round. That must have been fun.
Best job in the world.
Yeah.
What a shame there are fewer milkmen around now. Yeah, just brilliant. And I've actually said I'm still in touch with the guy. He's getting on a bit now, but Palaman, who used to work for a farm, he doesn't do the milk anymore, but. I remember saying to him, I tell you what, it's the best preparation for jobs really doing a milk round, because you've got to be able to talk to people.
Yeah.
And those people will be from all different walks of life, depending where it is that you deliver milk. So I really enjoyed that. I did that for years, all the way through uni as well, because it got to a point where the farmer could leave me with it. So I used to go off and do it, and he could concentrate on farming at home, and felt I was trustworthy enough to do it. So I did that for a long time.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and it's kind of there's a lot of focus these days on long and complicated food chains and the risks of that. But when you think about it, there's not a lot much purer than producing milk and taking it out on a milk float and giving it, well, selling it to your customers. So it's
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes
community is
yeah, we go looking for we go looking for the next big thing, don't we? When
mm,
actually, um, sometimes people have done the thinking for us in the past, haven't they?
mm,
They had relatively small numbers of cows, and they knew where the customers were, and they bottled it, and they did all that themselves, and they went to deliver it. They got the cash immediately. It was a good business. The type of area that I'm from, there would be a lot of those small dairy farms in that area. They all did that.
mm.
They all did that. So and that's changed over time. But as you say, sometimes the old ideas weren't bad ones.
No,
But
no.
I go very nostalgic on this, so we must make sure we don't like spend
Well,
an hour talking about milk rounds.
you're talking to the right man for over romanticizing things, Adam, as you probably know. So, yeah, it's probably a good idea to. I was just about to mention my granddad and his milk round, but I'm not going to because I'll probably end up crying. So, okay, agricultural college. You went to Askham Bryan College. What did you do? You study straight agriculture or?
I did. God, these are questions now, aren't they? I think it's is it called a foundation degree now? I did a HND,
Okay.
so that shows how old I am. So I did HND, and then that was in they called it land management, and then I did a top up degree, um, essentially in agriculture through Leeds, and then so that was quite practical, really. And then at that time, some of the papers that we were reading were coming out of Newcastle University, and I'd been at college and thought, "Oh, I wonder if I could do a masters. That would be interesting. Could I do that? A lot of the stuff that we're having to read for our college course, as I said, is coming out of Newcastle. At that time, Newcastle was it was sort of it was kind of like a bit of a new Labour think tank sort of thing,
Mm,
really. Sometimes, and think about Labour governments. I was at college 2003 to 2006. At that time, I think you probably got David Miliband, who was DEFRA secretary at the time.
yeah.
So a lot of stuff was coming out of Newcastle that we were looking at, and it was that post foot and mouth time, a lot of
Mm,
change in agriculture. What's going on? How we're going to make this different? What's going to happen in rural communities? What else can you do in rural communities that isn't just farming as well? Even though I'm interested in farming, I'm also interested in what happens in the countryside.
yeah.
What else is going on? So I went to Newcastle and did a master's in rural development. Essentially, what's all the other stuff that's going on? Because I was still interested, basically. So I ended up doing that.
So you didn't so, or maybe early on you did. Did you ever think about actually sort of going into farming, as in farm management or something like that? Or was it always sort of more industry?
I think it was probably more industry. I thought it's difficult to answer that, isn't it? Because sometimes you think, oh well, yeah, I always thought that I wanted to do this thing that I'm doing.
Mm,
Really, I'm not
mm,
sure about that. But I was interested in policy and politics and the things that are happening, which then has an impact on the ground in
yeah.
farming. And I suppose, doing the practical stuff, working on farms, clipping sheep, learning how to milk cows, all of that stuff that I did through college, and then actually, carried on doing that when I started working as well. When I started working for NFU, go and clip some sheep after work and did that, and that was sort of enough for me, really. I didn't want to be a farmer.
Mm.
Maybe in hindsight, you think, well, it was going to be a bit of an uphill battle, but I have really respect. I have a lot of respect for people who want to farm and end up farming, coming from a non-farming background like me. But I didn't do that.
I think sometimes um, those of us who are perhaps in a bit of a farming bubble, we forget how big our own industry is and how many roles and how much space there is for. You don't have to be a farmer to yeah, to be in agriculture. There's a lot of space for lots of different people.
Yeah, and this is also a bit of a nostalgic thing as well. But I don't know what made me think of it the other day. But I posted something on LinkedIn where there was an old boy from Huddersfield who had 4 kids. True story. And he said basically we've got a small farm. There ain't going to be space for you all here. There's a lot of time for farming before 9 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock at night.
Mm.
And I actually I think that's still true.
Yeah.
But I suppose you've got to be careful then going down that track, because people should be able to make a good living by being a farmer.
Mm.
You shouldn't have to go, well, I've got 3 part-time jobs to make this thing pay. But nevertheless, I do think, I agree with you. It's possible to be engaged in farming and take a lot of value from that and have an enjoyable career and be part of the agricultural industry without being a farmer. Exactly. And I think there's a lot of people like that. There's so many people in the allied trades, allied industry. I work for a science organization, loads of people from a farming background and from farms. And it's there's something that keeps us rooted to doing this type of stuff that we do. And I think it is somehow, I might struggle to articulate this, but it's almost like the same feeling that a farmer has been a farmer.
Yeah.
That the people connected to it, they feel something inside them, that they feel part of an industry and a bigger thing. And I definitely do. That's why I get excited about being, still connected to farming.
Yeah. Yeah, I can tell. When did you start writing your Farmers Weekly column? Was that when you were still at university? Because I used to read it. I've told you, well, I told you this before, but I used to read it. I used to really love your column.
They had a thing. I don't think they run it anymore. Well, maybe they do. Did it go in the farm life section or something like that? But they called it College Calendar at the time. I think they've now changed it, but they do have students writing it, I think. But they called it College Calendar, and they put out a competition to say, you write us 600 words on, I think it was something like, you're starting at college in September, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And send this in and enter. Anyway, they chose 2 of us. So I was delighted. So that's how it came up. So yeah, I used to write a monthly column all about what it was like being a student asking Brian. Well, most of it was true.
Yeah. No, it was great. It was really because I'm a little bit older than you, and I not long left university, but it was just very relatable. I always used to relate to your columns, where they felt sort of, I don't know, just very real and from the heart, and I always like that kind of writing.
Do I once went to shear some sheep for this farmer, and when I went there at the time, I'd bought a van. When I was at college, I had a little van, and they'd get me sheep shearing stuff in the back of it. Anyway, he goes, "Oh, I didn't think you were going to turn up in a van." So I said, "All right." He goes, "Well, you wrote in your column you got a little Ford Fiesta. You must have swapped it, have you?" I thought, oh my God, people are reading College Calendar and Farmers Weekly and remember. Oh dear. But yeah, no, I enjoyed doing that. And then you're writing in a different spot now, but in the opinion pages in Farmers Weekly, I did that a bit after that, because they were looking for opinion writers, and said, do you fancy doing that? So I did that for quite a while, actually. Yeah, no, it was enjoyable.
Did you do you feel you've always been good at communication? Is I guess as you've mentioned, that kind of milk round and early jobs must have had, but people who know you would say you are I'm not going to try and embarrass you, but they would say you are a natural communicator, and you're very, I don't know, people tend to warm to you. Is that come natural, or is that something you've had to work on?
Well, that's kind to say. I suppose it's for the people to decide whether they think that. But I mean, I suppose the writing thing actually has been helpful in my job so far, because we've all got a lot of information constantly coming at us, and what I try to do, and what I'm interested in, is how do we distill those things down into something that's really clear and easy to understand, and how do we do that, and then how do we then go and communicate that? And I always remember, actually, back to the Farmers Weekly thing, there was a guy who was he was a deputy editor at the time, so this is going to be 25 years ago now, who I used to send my column to, and I remember him saying, "Look, all you need to remember is nobody ever started reading something to get to the middle of it. Everybody wants to get to the end of this thing," which I took to mean, just don't make a bloody meal of it. Don't, don't don't go on too much. People
Yeah,
enjoy reading something,
yeah,
but we all do want to get to the end of the thing that we're reading
mm,
because we've all got other things to do. So therefore, how do we make sure that we're communicating the things that we need to communicate in a way that people are going to be engaged with? And we're all too busy. None of us have time. We've all got more information than we've ever had.
yeah,
Yet I feel a lot of us probably feel almost less informed than we've ever been, with more information than we've ever had. So
yeah.
therefore, we've got to find a way, haven't we, to really try to search through those things. And the different jobs I've done, I suppose you've got to try and refine that, because when I was working for NFU, and I'm the same now. How do we find the nuggets of information that are most important right at that moment, and then communicate that to people?
Mm.
And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, a lot of people relate to that. There's a lot of noise in our lives, isn't there? It's yeah, cutting through it. Okay. NFU, National Farmers Union, for people listening who might not realise, in the UK, huge organisation, probably the biggest name in farming, UK farming, I would say. How did you end up working for the NFU?
They have and it still runs actually. It's fantastic. If anybody, I don't know where they're at in the formation. I think they take people on every year, but they have a graduate scheme, graduate training scheme. And I applied for that and got on that training scheme, which was a 2-year training scheme. So I came out of union and applied and was successful and got onto that, which still runs. So I always, if anybody is listening to this, is at college and thinking what I want to go and do, look out for that training scheme. It really is fantastic. So I did that, which was, clues in the title, training scheme. And first of all, I remember I was at Newcastle when I got the call. They said, "Oh, your first placement's come through. It's Devon." So I was like, what? Thinking, oh, really? Okay. So as I moved to the southwest, and mainly worked with dairy farmers on dairy farming issues at that time. So I lived in Exeter for 6 months, and then worked on dairy issues at HQ. So I did that for a year, and then after a year you could apply for jobs. So I came off that and applied for a job in what was then the northwest region. So I worked with arable, horticulture, and poultry producers in the northwest. Did that for 2 years. Then this is like life history. Sorry, I'll try and quickly get through this. Then met my future wife, who lived in Leeds, and then transferred across to York in the northeast. So then worked on livestock, dairy, and poultry in the northeast. So if you like, covered all commodities and policy advice. Then got married. Then realised that I would love to live in England, but isn't it a big wide world?
Yeah.
Why don't we go and see what else is going on? So I went to work on European policy in Brussels for NFU for 4 years.
Wow. Okay. So first of all, I don't know, going straight from university to all that huge diversity of farming systems and farms and farmers, and it must have been quite an eye opener, really, because I I regret some of the because I left school and went straight home to work on the farm, and then I did go off to Harper, but even then my placement year was on another farm, and I kind of did a very well trodden path, and I wish I'd done a few different things now, but I was very much I don't know in my I wouldn't say I'd narrow horizons, but I wasn't aware of the wider farming industry so much and other parts of agriculture, even let alone other parts of society. So, yeah, what a baptism of fire in terms of seeing all those
Yeah,
different farming
but I mean,
systems.
I think we're all like that, when we're young, aren't we? I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
Um, but I suppose I wanted to know about it.
Mm,
And working for the interview with with a broad cross section of what they work on and their membership, and it's across the UK, was really valuable. And then
mm,
doing that, you also start to, and I suppose it'd be the same in farming as well. When you were working on different farms, you also start to work out what it is that you're interested in and
yeah.
like. It's agriculture's so broad, isn't it? But I quickly realize the types of jobs that I wanted to do in NFU and what was interested in the industry. In much the same way when, you know, people are at agricultural college and going to work on farms, that they start to go, oh, actually, no, that's the bit for me.
Yeah.
That's the thing for me. Or I've worked on this other farm, and then they go back to their home place and say to mum and dad, oh, what we want to be doing is, you know,
Yeah, I did do that.
yeah, there you go. Why don't we do this thing? Or why do you want to do
Yeah,
that? Because I don't like the thing that we're doing right now.
yeah,
That's essentially what it is. But no, I definitely had my eyes opened up and certainly tried to see a bit more of the world.
yeah. How did you and Laura meet?
Oh God, what a question,
I've got to ask you.
Will.
You mentioned that you met in Leeds. So that's not enough. How did you
Oh my
meet?
God, who's listening to this? Will, what is this? Is this a professional podcast or a personal podcast?
I don't have listeners. I just do it for fun.
Yeah, I met her on the internet before people met on the internet. All right, all right, that's it.
I'm going to ask you more about it next week.
Yeah, no, we'll talk about it when I see you.
What tell me about Brussels then.
So basically, I've been. This it feels like ancient history now when you think that we've left the EU,
Mm,
because all of this stuff sounds like, oh God, we used to talk about that stuff, and now we don't talk about that
not
stuff.
allowed to, no.
Well, yeah. But at the time, I was doing the stuff that NFU does, meeting with politicians and advocating for them. And there was a lot of stuff. I don't know. Policy geeks will be able to look back when it was. It's going to be maybe 2011, something like that. There's a huge amount going on approvals on pesticides, European
Hmm.
policy. So there's a lot of stuff going on that the NFU were working on at that time. And I was doing some of the meeting with MEPs, remember those members of the European Parliament?
I do.
So I was meeting with MEPs, and I said to my boss at the time, I wonder, is there a training course or some description on kind of how all of this works? You know, I know the issues that we're talking about, but when they start to talk about the intricacies of vote on this and how all that works, I feel a bit lost.
Mm.
You know, could I go on a course for some development? Anyway, it must have been it was a really nice guy. He's long since retired, but he must have been in a good mood because he said, well, that sounds a bit rubbish. Why do you need to go on a course? Why don't you just go to Brussels? Because we've got an office there. Why don't you go and, go and find out?
Mm.
So I said, okay. So he said, just ring them and say, you'd like to go. Maybe they could send somebody from Brussels to us. There'll be somebody who might want to work more closely with the, farmers on the ground. So I rang the office and basically said, that's what I'd like to do. Would that be possible? And they said, oh, well, that's good, because I just had a conversation with somebody here who was interested to know more what's going on the ground, because she's been doing all the political stuff in Brussels.
Yeah.
So she just said, why don't you two just work it out? You come to us for a fortnight. She'll come to you for a fortnight, do a job swap. Just work it out. So we did. So I went and we got married in the July, and I went in the November for a fortnight and thought, this is quite cool. Then went back. And then the following April, a job happened to come up, and I was fortunate enough to get the job and was successful. And then we moved. So we got married in the previous July, and then we moved to Brussels.
Amazing. And I mean, I've been to Brussels a few times. It's quite a unique place, isn't it? It's very transitory, isn't it? A lot of people aren't from Brussels who live there, aren't they? So it's quite an interesting dynamic.
Absolutely right. Good word, transitory. I found it a fascinating place because you were either, being invited to somebody's leaving drinks or a party or something like that, or we're going out for a beer because this new person's just arrived. Do you want to come meet them? So everybody's instantly got a bunch of people that they need to mate around with, because nobody's at, in general terms, in the type of work that we were doing in the dark arts of lobbying, nobody's really from there. So you're quite right. It's transitory. Everybody's just visiting. So and actually, when you say I've been a few times, you probably went on the Eurostar and pulled up into probably one of the worst train stations you've ever been to in Brussels. And it's just and then got on a metro system, which is also really depressing.
Yeah.
But actually, it's a fantastically green city.
Yeah.
The problem is so many people that do it that exact journey. They go into a meeting or something and go and sit in a relatively boring office block somewhere, and they don't see any of the city. But we had a great time. We love living there.
There's some amazing squares, isn't there? I was thinking.
Yeah, and a lot of green space, a lot of big parks. So we really enjoyed it and enjoyed being connected to other places. as well. Quite easily to go and see bits and bats of other parts of Europe. So it was a good time for us.
Yeah, very strong beer. You have to be careful with the beer in Belgium. That it's
Yeah, quite funny. I remember we always used to get visiting groups of farmers, and we would say what you've just said, and then they would think we were just being ridiculous, and why don't you man up a little bit? And we just said, well, you might want to just
mm,
perhaps think about drinking halves when you're
mm,
just the little ones. That's all right. You're
mm,
still a man. You're still very, very manly.
yeah,
Um, but it might be advisable that you drink some of the small ones. And then they all thought we were just totally wet.
yeah,
Um, until we saw them the next morning,
yeah,
when they hadn't listened to our advice and
yeah. No,
drunk some of the big ones. But yeah,
I can imagine. Well, actually, one of the times I went there was with NFU Cymru Next Generation group, and I was one of the older people in the group, and we kind of were relatively sensible, went back to the hotel early, but some of the younger people in the Next Gen group were not, and they were very, they suffered the next morning. Yeah,
yeah.
they,
Well, our old director of the office just used to say, just you can be a hero on a night. Just make sure you're a hero on a morning as well.
yeah,
Do whatever you
absolutely.
want, and yeah. So I try to keep away from very strong beer, and I'm fairly lame when it comes to drinking anyway, to be honest. But yeah,
Okay. You were part of the NFU during some great times of change in UK agriculture, as we've kind of already alluded to, Brexit and lots of other things. Give us some insight into how the organisation works behind the scenes. When a major event happens, and obviously we're seeing that a lot in the UK at the moment. A lot of things happen over the last 6 months, even for members and long-term members like myself and other members of the union. I, we probably wouldn't know how it all works as a machine. How does it?
yeah. I suppose I can only I don't work there anymore, so
Yeah.
I can only talk about some of the things that I was doing. I think if I we've been talking about working in Brussels. I think that the real value of the organisation is taking that what's happening at the grassroots all the way up the chain and back down the chain again
Mm,
from a political lobbying perspective. So use that as an example in Brussels. So the work that we were doing in Brussels, we were only credible because I'm not a farmer, as we discussed, but we were only credible because we were able to say, but this is what the people are telling us, or we'd be working with the president or the vice or
mm,
deputy president, where they were able to articulate the views of the members. And
mm,
it's incredibly powerful because otherwise, if you don't have that narrative and that story, because that's what it is, it's about family farmers doing their very best to make a living and run a good business and produce good food. That's what people want to do.
mm,
And how do you make sure that, if you like, the business environment in which they operate, and it's the same discussion with the UK government now we're no longer in the EU, it's the same topics. How do you make sure that they're able to do that? And the way that you do that is by being able to illustrate the impact of something, or even better, not necessarily illustrating the impact by saying, this is how we could make it better. Why don't we do this instead? So, your point before about interactions with people and trying to get on with people, that, essentially a political lobbying organization, whether that's the NFU or anybody else, is about how do we get more people to think that what you're doing is the right thing?
mm,
How do we win friends and influence people? But I do think for, NFU, for others, for farmers organizations, it's a really strong story, isn't it? And sometimes they win through and sometimes they don't win through, and it's not always easy. But it is about getting that story right and making sure that, I think, people are at the center of it. Why are we doing this thing? Well, it's about the people on the ground, isn't it? And that's what I always try to do. So in terms of how the process works, the lens that I always try to put over it would be, we hear about this thing that has been cooked up somewhere in a meeting room, which feels a long way away from the farm.
mm,
And my, refrain would always be, how is this gonna land in the back room of a pub when we're talking to farmers about it?
mm,
And how do we explain it to them? And how do we, importantly, um, how do we get their views and make sure that they understand it, and feed into that and have some impact on it? Because it might be that, a non-farmer or somebody like me working on policy, that there could be something that you've missed because you're
Mm.
not a farmer. You don't know. So that partnership between a professional person and a professional policy person. I mean, not that a farmer isn't a professional, but somebody working on those topics and a farmer was key. And if you like, now as I roll forward into the job that I'm doing now, that partnership between me and a scientist
Yeah.
working with a group of farmers is sometimes similar.
Yeah. I feel like I worry a lot about sort of public discourse at the moment. You know, there's a lot of people shouting, not many people listening, and yeah, I feel like yeah, it's a lot of that, isn't it? It's just getting people together in a room, isn't it? You know, whether it's policymakers and farmers or the NFU, or as you've said, just sometimes pointing out some of the obstacles to success. Because I think farmers often get very frustrated, and we think that all these MPs and civils, they don't know what they're talking about, and maybe that's the case with some of them, but I think most of them are pretty good people trying to do positive things.
Yeah,
You know,
you're quite right. In much the same way that farmers, by and large, are good
yeah,
people trying to do good things, aren't
yeah,
they? And,
yeah,
and
yeah,
sometimes things happen that are less good,
yeah,
But in general, I sort of think most people in the world are good people trying to do their best
yeah.
in whatever it is that they're doing. Um, and and I think I agree with you on the current public discourse on lots of things, but topics in agriculture, the environment. Um, when actually, if people just literally put the pitchforks down from all sides for a minute and just
Mm,
go, right, okay, what are the things here that we can agree on? What can we agree on?
mm,
But also as well, is there something that we can give a little bit of ground on? So, for example, if we at Fera, what we're doing is we're we're working with the industry, the wider agri-food industry, food companies as well. How do we reduce the environmental cost of food production through environmental science, through good science? And sometimes, if we have a farming group, what I might say, let's say we might be having a topic on water quality or just impact of the environment and agriculture. That's the topic that we're talking about. Sometimes I might say to a group of farmers, can we have a discussion about where we talk about agriculture's impact on the environment? And that is not me saying that farmers are doing bad things to the environment. I'm
hmm.
not saying that. But it is the case that there is an environmental impact from agriculture.
Yeah.
So why don't we face into that and talk about that? Because, and you might have seen this before when I've read it because it's a bit of a refrain of mine. The big challenges that we face, climate, environment, I'm going a bit deep here, sorry, Will, but those big challenges that we face, a lot of them, sometimes in a negative sense, sit at the door of agriculture.
Hmm.
And sometimes farmers get beaten over the head by that. But two almost opposite things can be true at the same time.
Hmm.
Because where I get excited is the biggest challenges that we face in climate and the environment, many of them will largely be resolved by the decisions that farmers and landowners choose to make with land.
Hmm.
So if we can bring science to bear to help them have truly sustainable, economically profitable, good for the environment businesses and a thriving natural environment, we're on to a winner. And we can't do any of these things without farmers.
Yeah.
It will not work.
Yeah.
The farmers have got to be there. So we've got to make sure that the farmers feel valued, but also that the farmers go, there might be some things that I need to do differently. How can I do that? Who do I need to work with?
Mm.
And that's why I'm excited about working in agriculture now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, it's I do know why farmers and the farming community often gets very defensive. I do understand why, because often we feel like we're the kind of I don't know, the enemy of everything.
Yeah,
Sometimes it can feel. So I do understand why, but then I also think there's a fine line between coming across as incredibly insecure, because sometimes when, as you've mentioned, agriculture does have an environmental impact, it's okay to have a grown up discussion about that. We don't have to get our hackles up and say no, it doesn't, and of course it does. And I think sometimes we just come across as a bit fragile and insecure, whereas we should be saying yes, it does, but
Yeah,
and just being
and I've,
loud and
yeah,
proud.
yeah, and then grown-up discussions can also help with whether it's an environment group that's got a
Yeah,
particular perspective,
yeah,
politician or others, because actually sometimes some of those organisations don't always get it exactly right,
no,
and don't mean to sound all sort of woolly on you, but the reality is we're only gonna solve. It's like anything in life, isn't it? We're going to solve these problems if people find a way to work together, because
mm,
not one person, individual, organization, company, whatever, has the answer to everything.
mm,
So let's just get on and work together. And
mm.
and really, I do think on these, I do get quite passionate about this. You can see me moving my hands around. like the time is now. The time is now, because
Yeah,
don't mean to go sort of doom mongering, but we've got a lot of stuff in front of us. This
we
is on
have.
our watch. Me and you are a similar age. Like it's sort of within this generation now of people who are doing this. We've got to sort these things. We've got to sort these things. I've got 3 kids under 10 who are wondering why it is I'm going to work every
Mm,
day. What is it that we're trying to do? And I don't mean to, I'm a very small part of trying to work on these things, but I care about it,
mm.
and I think we can do so much good stuff to solve the big agriculture and environmental challenges that we face. But it's going to look different, and we've got to work together.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I am quite excited about it, actually. I do think, without being blind to the challenges, I do find it exciting that farmers can have a big impact on that, and we'll, groundswell. I feel like I mention groundswell in every podcast at the moment, but the groundswell festival that's next happening next week in the UK, and anyone who hasn't heard of it can, if you just Google groundswell regenerative farming event, from the way that's grown in the last 6 or 7 years is unbelievable. And the amount of farmers there who are solution focused, very excited about the future, very keen to work together as farmers and work with industry and work with the wider food chain. There's a lot of I don't know, there's a lot of will there, isn't there? A lot of
Yeah,
desire to help and be
yeah,
part of the solution.
I totally agree, and you know, I am always mindful, because I think I'm not a farmer,
Mm.
no heavy lifting involved in my job, right? You shake my hand in it's sort of quite soft, but so I'm not being flippant when I say I'm excited about this, because we're in this period of, in the countryside and in farming, we're in this period of huge change, really,
Mm.
social, economic change, environmental change. But that doesn't mean that it can't be exciting. It just means it is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. There's a lot that there might be even more hard stuff coming as well. Who knows what will happen in the future? It's not easy, but I think you're right when you think about groundswell or any event. I didn't go to cereals this year, just because I can't get around every event, but I heard great things about cereals.
Yeah.
People going, God, it was a good event.
Mm.
Everybody really needed to get together. And it feels like I'll be going. What am I doing this year? I'm going to go to groundswell. I'll go to the Yorkshire show. I might get around to some other stuff as well, but that's it. But the local shows that are now in full swing. You see on social media, people are delighted to be there, aren't
They
they?
are, yeah.
And there'll be some things where people are talking about, oh, it's hard, isn't it?
Mm.
But also as well, they're coming together because they're going, we're doing this, aren't we?
Yeah.
And that gives me excitement for the future.
Absolutely. Okay. So you worked at the NFU for a number of years. We talked about that. So was it just you just got time for a change? You just felt like doing something different in the end?
Well, in part, to be fair, the NFU had a review, so they went from 7 regions to 4.
Okay.
So they went through a review, and I'd been there for a while. So I went to work at Fera. I've been there for 2 years now, and in some ways you think, oh, it's a big jump into what maybe feels like a different industry in science. But actually, I suppose some of the things that I learned in NFU about, bringing people together and listening to what people are saying, and some of the communication things that we were articulating before are really very relevant to what we're doing now.
Mm.
So Fera is a commercial science organization working in agri-food, but it's 25% owned by DEFRA and 75% privately owned. So it works across the public sector and private sector. So whilst I'm not, my job is not to work directly on policy issues, there's so much of what's happening in the world and what's happening on farm. You as a farmer have got to have one eye on what's happening on policy, so you know what it is that you need to do, or where the potential funding opportunities are. But it's also very similar in a science organisation as well. If we're coming forward with ideas that can help the industry, we've also got to understand where the industry's at and where and what might happen. What are the government thinking about in agricultural policy, environment policy, food policy? There's a lot happening in that space right
Mm.
now, as it is in other parts of the world as well, and in Europe, elsewhere. A lot of governments are, grappling with these issues. And I firmly believe, and I'm not just saying it because I work for a science organisation, that a lot of these answers are going to be through new and exciting innovations in science to
It,
do with the challenges that we've got.
it's a hell of an exciting time to be in science, isn't it? I was thinking about this before when I was thinking about talking to you. It's when you think of the developments over the last few years, and even how AI is kind of beginning to impact all our lives already. I'd never heard of it until not very long ago. Um, yeah, it's quite an exciting time, I guess. The developments that are going to happen over the next 5 years, the next decade are incredible.
Yeah, yeah, and I went to an event recently where they sort of posed a question. They were preparing for a conference, and they proposed a question around resilience, which is sort of something that we're going to a lot of conferences on resilience, and we're
Yeah, yeah,
talking about this. But one of the things that I said in the intervention I made was, to when you think about the future, and 2025, sort of as a number is quite an interesting one, because before you know it, we're all sort of focused on 2050, aren't we? So 25
mm,
years hence, 25 years hence, what's going to be happening by 2050? But I said in this meeting, to roll forward, you've also got to roll back.
mm,
And I'm not that old, but I've been around in the industry, let's say, for a bit. So I can do 25 years back to 2000, and I can roughly remember what was going on.
mm,
And whether that's in our politics or, to the root of your question, what's happening in science now, if you think about the innovation that has happened in the past 25 years and what is now
yeah,
completely normal, and whether that's on mobile phone tech, stuff that we're doing, I am talking to a podcaster on Zoom about agriculture, and
yeah,
we think some people are listening to this. All of this stuff that's happened, even how we're sharing information and knowledge exchange, and we're all now, and we think it's normal. We're all now connected to people,
yeah,
perhaps indirectly, but all over the world through things like this, aren't we? So we can't say that we've got, mates necessarily in different countries, but we know each other, and
yeah,
farmers are doing that as well, aren't they?
yeah, yeah,
They're learning things from each other.
yeah,
So basically, I'm a bit long-winded, but I'm excited about it, because if you roll forward the next 25 years, you could get really scared and go, "What the hell is going to happen? I can't follow any of this stuff." But equally, you can go, "What were we scared about in 2000?
mm,
What was this new tech that was coming, which is now
yeah,
completely normalized?" And I'm probably more excited than scared when I think
mm,
like that.
yeah. And for oh, because what's FERA stand for? FERA. What's it stand for?
The organization is called Fera Science, but it has its roots before it was privatized in government, and was called, towards the end of being part of government, the Food and Environment Research Agency. That's
Very
his
much
previous
so.
name. But
Okay,
that's his previous name. The Fera Science,
but
commercial science organization.
it encompasses a huge amount of things, doesn't it? I mean, I was quite surprised. I had a look on the website and did a bit of scratching about, and in terms of yeah, to call it a science organization isn't quite doing it justice, is it? Because it's got responsibility for a huge amount of different things, doesn't it? Perhaps you could just tell me
Yeah,
a
yeah. I
few
mean,
of those.
I won't, I won't
Well,
cover everything,
no.
sort of considering the audience, if you like. But from an agricultural point of view, we're doing a huge amount, in part for government around environmental monitoring, borders, trade, biosecurity, all those issues as well.
Mm,
The government have a responsibility to keep the country safe.
hmm
Plant health issues, all of that, which is also linked into politics, and then a huge amount around pest and disease management. Some of the projects that I'm working on, collaboratively with farmers and growers, are how can we how can we bring science to bear on dealing with some of these problems that are materializing. And how I would describe this is that it's not a disconnect, but you've got a bumping up of, this is a non-scientific way of describing this, but we're seeing this in a number of different areas. You've got a bumping up of productive agriculture, let's say on the one hand, and I'm going to say versus, but I don't necessarily mean versus, bumping up against the side of an agri-environment scheme or an
mm,
environmental measure or an SFI, whatever it
mm,
is, whatever country you're in, you've got these things bumping up against each other because farmers are being urged either politically or by the market to do both, or because they want to do,
mm,
quite rightly, that this makes sense to do these things, cover cropping, whatever, all of these things. But from our perspective, bringing our scientists to bear, many of them working on pest and disease management, virologists, entomologists, what we're seeing is that there are some unintended consequences sometimes of those environmental actions that have been undertaken,
mm,
which is then making farmers have to think, okay, well, I still want to have that environmental feature and that cover crop in there. That's really important to me. But I'm now having to make some different decisions in
yeah,
my management of the crop elsewhere. So that's why it's so important that we've got that interaction with the farming industry, because things are changing. And the answer can't be, or because there are fewer chemical options to deal with this. The answer has to be done in a different way.
mm,
So a lot of our projects go in that, and then we've got a ton of people working on water quality issues, and a natural capital team, land management. Looking at biodiversity, habitat, carbon baselining. What does that mean? Big team of ecologists as well. To use tech to understand what's happening on the ground and mapping, and then pairing that with ecologists who can go on the ground. And everything in between. Really, it's a fascinating place to work. And what we find is that a problem on a farm that arises is often multi-pronged. Really,
yeah.
you might need a range of different scientists. So I'm sort of in the middle of that, and I come home every day. My brain works because my brain hurts rather, because
Yeah, I bet it does.
they're all scientists, and I'm not a scientist. So I'm doing my best to keep up and listen to them.
Yeah, I'll bet. No, one of the things I was quite interested in, and which I didn't realize, and probably not a lot of people else do, is when I read about what you do there, is that Fera is part of the UK capability to respond to and recover from emergency situations, including accidental or deliberate release of hazardous materials, and scarily, that feels quite prescient at the moment, with everything that's going on in the world. So yeah, it's not
Yeah,
something.
yeah, no, it's an important part, and that there are other other science organisations who also do the same.
Yeah,
Um, if there is something that comes into the country from
yeah.
a plant perspective, that shouldn't be there, there's a need for governments to have that capability to deal with it and
Mm.
the scientific expertise, and FERA is an important part, if you like, of that ecosystem of science organisations who are on hand for the government to help.
Mm. Yeah, you just don't really. I don't know, or maybe other people do. Maybe it's just me, but it's not something that I don't know. Guess we're all busy, but I don't really give it that kind of stuff a lot of. What I suppose what piqued my interest is I read recently that they'd had a bit of this in America uh, with the Chinese, and yeah, it's suddenly the world's kind of those fragile food chains that we mentioned earlier, it's all becoming scarily quite relevant, isn't
Yeah, yeah, no, no, we do, we do have fragile food chains, and I suppose if you like, back to my resilience point before, and we've got to strengthen that resilience, whether that's in the
it?
natural environment, whether that's in our food production, whether that's in food safety as well. We got to make sure that food is as safe as it's possible to be as well. We do a lot of that work at Fera as well, but also as well, are there how do we make the agri-food chain more resilient? Are there different options that we can bring to bear? So we do all sorts of stuff on testing new materials for food packaging, for example, made out of different things. There's a world of things that we don't necessarily always think about when we're going to buy food.
Yeah.
And of
Sure, yeah.
course, we're having a discussion here. I'm sat talking to a farmer, so we're engaged in this stuff, aren't we? So, if you go to a supermarket,
Yeah.
I'm such a nerd because I'm like looking at the packet, and I want to see, does it say the farmer's name, where it's come from, and
Yeah.
all right, so they supply them and they do that. Well, most people are not doing that, are they? They're not.
No.
Let's be honest, because they don't have time to do that because they're just trying to, nip into the shop quick and get home after work. But when you start to unpack that stuff, you go, whoa,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
food chain is pretty complicated, isn't it? And we've got to make sure that we get that right.
Mm.
And interestingly, I suppose let's not mention those retailers, but those retailers that have had, recent difficulties in their
Yeah.
supply chains as a result of a cyber attack, and
Yeah.
nothing to do with anything that we work on at Fera. But I sort of looked at that and then, go into the shop on the way home, probably to buy beer and crisps. I can't say that was buying anything nutritious, but that's what I was probably doing. But when I go in there and I'm thinking, where's all the stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you start to go, oh God, yeah. This is why agriculture is important.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. Really cool. Yeah, really cool. When I started looking into it, I was just, yeah, it's a wormhole I could have gone down. But yeah, it must be just a fascinating place to work. And I'm sure you do come home some nights just mentally exhausted from learning stuff, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I do, but it's great. It's exciting.
Yeah. You mentioned it earlier, but you are really good on LinkedIn. So anyone who follows you will know this. And at the end of every week, you tend to put a quite a positive post about sometimes just really simple things you've done with the family or the kids or people you've talked to, a conversation you've had, and it's very uplifting, and you get a lot of nice comments about it. Is that something you just
Oh,
like?
that's kind. That's kind. I do it right. Right, you're going to get my views on social media now. Right. So, do you remember when there was that thing called Twitter?
I do.
You remember that Twitter thing?
When it
Right.
used to be nice. Yeah.
Well, I know, but come on, you're showing your politics when you say that. Who's listening to this? So anyway, I used to do Twitter stuff, and now I don't do Twitter stuff because I was like, what the hell happened here?
Mm.
This thing just went mad. So I don't have a Twitter account anymore. Um, um, but I do have a LinkedIn account.
Yeah.
And sometimes, people probably go, "Oh God, here he is on a podcast. He's got even more to say." But sometimes you feel like you feel like you want
Yeah.
to say some stuff. So I just do a post on a Friday, and trying to just reflect on the week slightly. And sometimes that's work, because I've been working a week, and we're going to talk about these things. And sometimes it's family stuff as well because I've got 3 kids. And I just try and do it, and I just like interactions with people, really.
Yeah.
And I found, in my experience, that even though LinkedIn is, I used to think that LinkedIn was just somewhere where you went looking for a job.
Yeah.
It's actually like it's a really good community of people. Actually, I find it really pleasant, and it feels a little bit like Twitter used to be
Yeah.
before it went a bit crap.
Yeah.
In my opinion. In my opinion. In my
Yeah. Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. Well, preaching to the converted. But yes, I really like those posts. I told you last week, didn't I? Yeah. I look forward to them. It's just, I don't know. I just think, these days, without going too heavy, a lot of people have shouldering a lot of burden and a lot of worry and a lot of um, concerns about the world and feeding their family and all the rest of it. And I just think anything that kind of makes people smile or lifts people up
Oh
in a
yeah,
small way is, you know,
and
is a good thing.
we've all got to be real, haven't we? Let's be honest. Social media is, in general terms, is the sort of lens we put over our lives, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
In really,
it is. Yeah.
and I think it can be. I do think it can be pretty damaging, really.
Mm.
And I think it's quite good when, and I think you probably see more of this actually because people are, you know, sort of calling out bullshit, really, aren't they? Really,
Yeah, yeah.
let's just talk about how it really is,
Mm.
and and I think more and more farmers are doing that on social media as well. Just like we're all in this together. We're all relatively normal. We're all just doing our best here, and I think that's the same in the world in which I operate, and the people I interact with on LinkedIn as it is directly as farms in agriculture.
Yeah,
People just need to be normal, don't we?
absolutely. But before you left Twitter during lockdown, and speaking of making people smile, you had a viral tweet that went absolutely nuts. Uh,
It actually did. I before I left Twitter, I printed it off, and we're going to get it framed and put it in the downstairs toilet.
that's a
Just
really
like
good
a,
idea.
a viral tweet.
Hmm.
Yeah, basically we did a viral tweet. I mean, this is slightly ridiculous, isn't it? But it was one of it.
But it was a ridiculous time, wasn't it?
It
Lockdown.
was a
It was,
ridiculous time. I mean, like,
yeah.
oh god, as we're now thinking, I'll now explain this tweet, which won't sound remotely funny when we talk about it, probably. But it was that ridiculous time when we were going into lockdown, when basically everybody went slightly nuts, didn't we?
Hmm.
When we went into lockdown, and our neighbour, forever known as Jean next door, was going in the house, and we had a 5-year-old. Our eldest was 5 at the time, and he shouted, "Oh, Jean, you've got to go inside, Jean. There's a virus." We're actually just been interrupted by a small child. Are we still recording?
Guest appearance.
Yeah, guest appearance on video. Are we allowed to do this? Or are you going to cut this bit out?
No, 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 it's fine.
You're going to cut this bit out.
I can do.
If you don't have to cut it out. You just talk amongst yourself while I just politely get rid of this child. You just wait there. I'll be back one moment.
It's fine. All right. You're like the BBC North Korea correspondent then. When the
You're gonna have to. Does that mean that means we've been talking for too long? Is this going to be too long? You'll have to edit that bit. It's because people have gone out and left a child for a moment. Sorry.
Don't worry.
Can you cut bits out?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
I can. Yeah.
I'll quickly do the viral tweet.
Yep.
You asked me that. Yes. So in that moment in lockdown when people went slightly mad, we had a 5-year-old who was talking to somebody next door who will now be known as Jean next door forever, and shouted, "Jean, Jean, Jean, you've got to go inside, Jean. There's a virus." And she said, "I know, I know." And I said, "How old are you, Jean?" "I'm 68." "Yeah, but Jean, that's nearly 70, Jean. You've got to go inside." So I basically wrote all this stuff down and I just really genuinely said it. And then it was like something mad, like 500,000 retweets or something crazy. It ended up on BuzzFeed. Oh, Jesus. Yeah. So anyway, she's now known as Jean Next Door, saved in my phone as Jean Next Door. People periodically, yeah, only periodically, not that often, sometimes like send me a message and say, "How's Jean?" Jean's
Did she
fine.
did,
She's
did
absolutely
she
fine.
enjoy being a viral sensation?
Well, I had to tell her because
Yeah,
she's
because
not on social media, so I had to go, Jean. Like, I'm really sorry, Jean, but you've just gone viral on Twitter, Jean. Um, so anyway, she was delighted. Fairness, yeah. So at least we didn't say anything rude about Jean, which was good.
yeah, yeah, fantastic. All right. We've been talking for ages, but tell me about Fieldwork Book Club. How
Oh,
did
that was a
how did that come about? How did you
yeah,
get together?
that was a lockdown thing as well. That was on the New Year when well basically Boris cancelled Christmas, didn't he? We all had plans because we thought we could do that again and then we
Hmm.
couldn't. So I was working on New Year's Eve and I took a picture of a bookcase with family books on it. And that was on Twitter. I put it on Twitter and said, does anybody else read books like this? Essentially. And because everybody's like basically feeling depressed because they're not going anywhere on New Year's Eve and just sat like looking at their phone,
Mm,
people replied and said, "Oh, I read books like that." So then I said, "Oh, okay." Strangely, maybe is there something in like maybe a book club?
yeah.
How do we do this? Because none of us can meet. Um, and then all of a sudden, people go, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do this." Um, so I know James Reedbanks relatively well, and I had his number, and basically everybody had probably received his second to last book, English Pastoral, for
Yeah.
Christmas.
Yeah, I think
Most
I
people
did.
got it, including I
Yeah.
had. So everybody was kind of on, it was the book of the moment.
Yeah.
So I text James and said, "Oh, this we've got a book club. Don't know how it's going to work. Um, maybe if I interviewed you, we could read the book. What do you think?" So he said, "Yeah, I'm quite busy because I'm writing my next book now, so we'll do it tomorrow." All right, okay. So it just happened to be New Year's Day, so none of this would have happened really
Yeah.
in normal time. So we did it New Year's Day night, and then good pal of mine, Ruth, who I went to college with, um, Ruth messaged me and said, "What the hell's going on? Do you need some help?" Because I actually do know how to use Zoom. Because I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not. What is this Zoom? Do you remember that Zoom thing?
I
What's this Zoom
do.
thing?
Yeah.
So Ruth said, "Oh, do you want a bit of help with that?" So I said, "Yeah." So we worked out how to send a message out to people in a mailing list, and got organised with a Zoom account, and interviewed James about his book on the 1st of January, whenever that was, and 150 people turned up. It was great. So we did that, and then we got about 600 people on a mailing list who get an email to say, "We're reading this book this month. Join in. We've got this author," and it's just great because it's just a totally relaxed book club. There is no pressure. I send a note and go, "You don't even need to read the book. You're not going to get asked any. Don't worry. Just join in and listen." So that's really good. A mixture of back to your point before on farmers and environmentalists and foodie type
Yeah.
people, and getting more people to talk to each other. So we keep doing that. It's fun.
Yeah, you're really good at it. I told you before. I think you're like a young Michael Parkinson. You're very good at sort of making people and because authors I've seen authors like all writers they're really good at writing, but they're not always very good at
Yeah,
talking about what they've written, and then sometimes need it bringing out of them, don't they? And
yeah,
you're
yeah.
very good at that.
I try my best. I mean, most of the time, I've been fortunate enough that thankfully most of them are plenty to say.
Yeah, yeah,
But I did once interview one author who shall remain nameless, who clearly did not want to be there at all, and just thought, I did not start writing books to have
right,
to do
okay.
stuff like this. I don't want to talk to anybody. Um, which, yeah, God, that was hard. Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
bet.
Because what you need is to ask one question that sets them off and then keep
Yeah,
chipping
yeah,
in. But so most of the time it's good, but you're right. You've got to try and get it out of them, and what we do when we're interviewing people, we bring the questions in from people. That's the best bit, to be able to ask questions. So yeah, so it's fun. It's fun. At least fun stuff. It's exciting.
if you got a new block of books coming out, how can people find out more if they want to
Yeah, what they
want to
need
get
to do.
involved?
So to be, even though I'm saying it's fun and great, we have had a little gap just because life gets in the way. So we've had a little gap, but we have been reading. I'm going to get the exact title Tales from Beyond the Hedge, Richard Negus,
Yeah,
hedge layer. I think I've got
yeah.
the correct title. Apologies to Richard if I haven't. But basically, what people need to do if they want to join is just email fieldworkbookclub@gmail.com. That's, I'll say it again. That's fieldworkbookclub@gmail.com. And then basically they get an email. And if you want to join, just click join and join in. And that's it. There's no pressure. So we read the book, and then the week after, the month after rather, we have a conversation about the book.
Lovely. Okay. Cool. All right then, Adam. Let's finish this off with the traditional hard-hitting questions. What's the
Tough
best?
questions.
They are tough questions. People think this is, yeah, this is easy, but it's not. It's really hard. What's the best gig you've ever been to?
The best gig I've ever been to. There's a lot of them, but we went to two. It was 2 years ago, as of this week. I remember. We went to the open air theatre in Scarborough, which I'd never been to before then, which I can recommend. They have some good gigs on. And we took the kids to see Rag and Bone Man.
Oh, cool.
And it was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I've been to other gigs before, which were good. But yeah, Rag and Bone Man, that's cool.
Awesome. Nice. You can't. It's nice outdoor venues, aren't they? When the weather's nice and it's a nice sunny evening, it's can't
Yeah,
beat it.
spot on,
Can.
spot on.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh my god, the best piece of advice. Oh, that's a tough one. Wish I'd thought about this a little bit beforehand. Okay, a bit of like old sagey type stuff. I don't know if it's advice necessarily, but it's definitely true for me just now. Yeah, when all farmers say, don't forget that an hour in the morning is worth two at night. You know,
Mm,
that's right for me, really. Whether that's in doing practical things or at work, I'm like, let's get going on the morning,
yeah.
up and off. Yeah, we can achieve a lot more, definitely.
Yeah.
So I'm an early bird.
Yeah. Well,
I
you
suppose.
must. As a former milkman, you must be good in the
Yeah,
mornings.
yeah. Fine, yeah. Let's get firing early. So yeah, I think that's probably. I'm not sure that's advice. I think that's a
No, no, it's
maybe. There you go.
no, it is. What's the? I'm asking someone who started a book club. What's the best book you've ever read,
Oh, is it yeah? Is there a difference between best book you've ever read
or the one that's had
or
the biggest
favorite?
impact on you? I guess.
Oh, favorite book. Oh, I'm gonna go all nostalgic and like, all woolly with you now. The finest book in my opinion is I Bought a Mountain by Thomas Fairbank.
Hmm.
It's just a fabulous book,
Yeah,
So you got to give me like two sentences on this. Guy in the 1930s moves from Canada for whatever reason. He was in Canada at the time. Comes and buys a big lump of Snowdon, and
Hmm.
it's a love story with the farm.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
One of my
We're gonna
favorites as well. Yeah, yeah, I love it. Okay. If you could meet any historical figure, who would it be and why?
That's a funny one. I'm gonna go. We're being interrupted. Sorry.
That's all
This is not helpful, Will. We're running out of time.
right.
Will you just sit here with me for 1 minute? Just sit with me for 1 minute. Just meet Will here. Sorry, Will.
Hi, buddy.
You can edit, can't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Stand up. Just stand up here a minute.
Sorry, bud. I've stolen your dad from you, haven't I, for a little
Don't
bit?
worry. Can I just finish this one? Shall I put something else on for you? I'm sorry, Will. I'm going to be back in 1 minute.
All
This has
right.
been a pain. This has
It's
been a
all
pain
right.
for you. I'm
We're
so
we're
sorry.
nearly finished anyway,
I'll be
so
one
don't worry.
minute.
Yeah, yeah. Don't worry.
Downstairs. I'll put it on quick.
All right.
I'm so sorry.
Don't be sorry. Fine.
It's Cubs night, and they're going on a walk. Two of them have gone. Laura's gone. He's on his own watching telly.
Don't worry at all. I've got to go and pick one of mine up from Taekwondo in a minute anyway, so we've got to get finished. Okay, I'll ask you that. I'll ask you that again.
Oh, Will, but what am I going to say? What am I going to say? What do people say?
I don't know. Sometimes people go for classic figures, people they'd like to have a conversation with, and sometimes it's a bit more personal.
Let me just. Who would I like to meet? That was a question, wasn't it? Which
Yeah,
historical figure would
yeah,
I
yeah,
like to
yeah,
meet
yeah,
and have a conversation with?
yeah,
Okay, ask me the question. Got it.
yeah. Okay. If you could meet any historical figure, sit down and have a conversation with them, who would it be and why?
It would be. This is not because I'm a royalist, particularly, not a massive royalist, particularly, but it would be the Queen.
Hmm.
What a life
Yeah.
over that period of time, when she was the Queen and before.
Hmm.
The events and the people that she met,
Hmm.
just absolutely unbelievable,
Yeah.
and that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
It would,
No.
if you could go for tea with the Queen, wouldn't that just be fantastic?
Yeah. No. Great answer. And lastly, then, what's your all-time favorite song?
Will, you did give me some prompting on this one as well. My all-time favorite song. This is going to be really nostalgic and like, oh my god, has he actually said that? Okay, Kenny Rogers, The Gambler.
That's such a great choice.
Oh no, but it's quite cheesy, and that people are going to be like, "Are you
No.
kidding?"
I love it.
Kenny Rogers, The Gambler, right? I know all of the words, and
Yeah,
that
me
has
too.
that has put three of my children to sleep. Honestly, if you just put it on on Spotify next to you can have that. Anybody who's got young children struggling to get them to sleep, Kenny Rogers, The Gambler on repeat 3 times on Spotify. Boom.
Awesome. Well, I grew up with My dad was a big 1970s country fan, so any car journey from my entire childhood was Kenny Rogers, Glenn Campbell, Johnny Cash, Dolly Parton. That kind
Okay,
of
are we allowed? Are we allowed all-time number one album though?
yeah, go.
Just to
Yeah.
finish with. Okay, I've actually should have said this song really, but you got me on the hop. Number one, the finest album in the world, Paul Simon, Graceland.
Oh yeah, it's a good album. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It
So
is a good
actually,
album.
what if you edit this, you should have said, yeah, it should have been one of those songs, really.
Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, that is a brilliant album. Yeah. Okay.
There we are.
All right, Adam. Thank you so much for your time. We've talked for ages. I knew we would.
Oh
I
no, is
knew
it going
we'd
to be
kind of.
really long? Will you cut it down?
Yeah, I expect so. Yeah, but
Please do.
these conversations, this is what they always end up being because
No, but do people turn off halfway through? It can't be like an hour and 25 minutes,
I
can it?
don't think so. I don't think so. I think people like them, the deep dives, aren't they? But yeah, I
Oh
don't know.
God,
I
cut
don't
me
know.
down. Edit. Will
We'll
edit.
find out. We'll find out. Okay, thanks to everyone at home for all the nice messages and comments we've been getting recently. Very much appreciated. And if everybody could like, share, rate, review, all that jazz, it's all a massive help. Thank you, Adam, for your time. You can get back to the family now. And yeah, I will catch you next week at Grantsfield for a beer. And to everyone at home, thanks for listening and hope to see you next time. I've been Will Evans. This has been Rock and Roll Farming. Thank you and good night. That's it. All done.
I hope that's not too long. Don't make
No,
it.
not too.
Don't make it an hour and 20. Don't make it. Oh God. Anyway, I'm going all anxious now.
Nah, it was great. Really good conversation.
Do you always wear that T-shirt?
I always wear different band t-shirts. Yeah, I've got about 10, so I sort of rotate them, put them on rotation.
Well done. I've really enjoyed that. Thanks for asking me.
Good. No, I have too. Yeah, and yeah, look forward to catching up for that beer on Tuesday.
Buy your beer. See ya.
Yeah. All right. Cheers, mate.
Bye
See
bye.
you later.